like now to introduce our guest speaker tonight. It's Mr. Bernard Collaery. Bernard practices law in the ACT, but quite sadly for doing his job, he's been, well, I'd say persecuted rather than prosecuted for taking a stance for moral integrity. Our cake tonight, which is our dessert, which will be coming later, is integrity, and it's named integrity. And I'd like every one of you tonight to have a little piece of integrity for your dessert. Bernard, I think many of you already know, and I'm not going to go over it, how he stood up for the principles, particularly of justice, and he's the one who is not afraid to take people on. He's fought many, many issues for people who have been sadly affected and neglected by the system. And he's always been there to champion for the underdog. He's no stranger to adversity. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bernard Collaery to you to speak to us about the things that he can talk about and to mention the things that he can't talk about. And I'm quite sure that and he is an excellent barrister. When you need help, this is the man. He's been helping us for 20 years.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I should acknowledge, of course, that I'm on the lands of the Bundjalung people, who, of course, over history suffered monstrous injustice, and to have had a taste of that myself, and for those of you who shared injustice, we just got a basic idea of what happened to the Bundjalung people and all of those nations. So I'm honoured to be here. I'm doubly honoured to be in your company. I've had an interesting conversation with Lady Mayor and her consort. I've just formed the view that some parts of Australia are getting ahead of other parts on issues of values and integrity. And it's occurring to me that here is another community that's bonded and moving ahead of the rest of the nation on subjects that people still deny, like climate change, for instance. I wasn't too happy when Jack told me to talk about integrity. And he said, oh, well, you can talk about values. Well, they're not things you can write a speech about. How do you give a lecture about integrity or values? It's something you know. If you don't know, then you shouldn't be here. The reality is, Jack gave me a terrible topic. Tonight, I've been looking around, thinking about how I could talk about integrity and not talk about myself. And thanks, Jack. And so the ABA, all the years I've known it, is full of very unsung heroes. And of course, values of courage and bravery and the rest are not those, for many reasons, that people wish to reflect upon themselves. People are modest. But I need to talk to you about how I understand integrity. And when you think about it, where did you get your sense of values and integrity if it wasn't from your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your teachers, your uncles, your aunts, and all the things that you've met in life? You get and leave this world noted, hopefully, for your values. So we never know what and how life will cast us and what values we'd have to have in some situation we'd never anticipate we'd be in. So the core issue about integrity, Jack, and values is what you've innately brought to it yourself, where you're at in life, and how you deal with a situation you hadn't anticipated. Now, when witness K, a very senior veteran, got to be careful, Australian Secret Intelligence Service officer came to me with approval, because I was an approved lawyer for people from the intelligence community. I was, at that time, the legal advisor, and had been for many years, to the East Timorese leadership, in particular the East Timorese at that time Prime Minister. How on earth a mob called an intelligence service could not realise what they do to me by sending someone who I didn't know where he'd served to me for legal advice about a very issue that would engage my ethics as a barrister? Can you believe it? It wasn't a conspiracy, because I knew that Witness K was not there to entrap me. I've done many criminal trials, and like you, seen many things, and awful things at times, but nothing struck me so much in my whole life to this day than the utter treachery, the utter treachery of what had transpired in East Timor. I'm no longer allowed by orders to say what it was. The whole world knows, but I cannot address it. But I had been working with the Timorese, with the leadership, living, travelling, sleeping, not in the biblical sense, with the leadership. And I was working all those years to try and foster a good working intelligence relationship between that new country and Australia. I worked hard at it. I can't go into detail. And to think that we would be so treacherous took my breath away. And I always remember saying, "What did you say?" And he said, he gave me an example of the moral issue that was worrying him. I said, "Look, mate, I think we better pick up on this conversation later. I'll give you a ring. I've got to think about this." And as a lawyer, you often have ethical issues. Maybe some lawyers here, you can have your witness in the box and you suddenly realise, that's not what he told me. You've got to keep a poker face. You can't, but you must not build if you know there's a lie. And, I'll go to my grave. I've never ever led a client in the box knowing that a falsehood would come from that person. Never ever done it on my mother's grave. And they're the values that my profession largely have, although you see differently in the American movies and that about lawyers. But there was a massive ethical challenge for me when Witness K told me something. I'm a patriotic Australian, I like to think that, but it was beyond belief to me that the Howard Downer government could be doing what I was told. It was beyond belief to me. I was working very hard in Timor to stave the Chinese off. Few of you know that with Interfet came the Chinese as well. They came into Timor, they brought police, their police echelons, they carried small pistols, always remember that, small revolvers, they were small men maybe, and they all looked neat. They ran very neat police stations up in the Highlands, and they went on to build the Defence Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, the President's Palace, and there were red tractors dotted all over the landscape. They knew what they were up to in Timor, and I was working hard to ensure that we could develop a very strong alliance with East Timor. And the East Timorese were very upset all through those years about the bad deals they'd got and the oil and gas issues that had got away from them. They'd signed the wrong things and they couldn't work out why they'd been dudded. Well, now I can't go on with the rest of that, but you work it out. So at the same time as that Witness K was coming to my office, I was busy with the St James Ethics Centre in Sydney, taking young Australian leaders, young people in the Defence Forces, police, business, industry, state, public services, farmers, young leaders, up to Hanoi, to Cambodia, to Malaysia, to Jakarta, to meet with, under Chatham House rules, comparative leaders of the same age, generation, and they were, in some cases, young communist leaders, and we would talk about values and how Australia worked. You can imagine how I felt keeping quiet about something. More to the point, could you imagine why, when I went up to Delhi in the 2 years before I decided what to do, why I'd say to Chanana, I think let's go up the mountain and have a talk somewhere in the bush. You can imagine why I didn't want to speak in the Palazzo Governero or anywhere like that. Imagine being in my shoes. And that's the sort of thing you can't teach at law school. It's the sort of thing that I think Jack wants me to talk about, which is how do you make a call in a situation like that? And I just knew the day I decided, look, I'll have to move on this. I was in Hanoi. Could you believe it? Our conference centre where we were discussing matters with the young Vietnamese leaders was inside of Ho Chi Minh's, mausoleum. And a woman from one of the services, I've got to be careful, stood up and was engaged in a lively debate about what Australian values are and what we stood for, and how she saw herself serving her country and how these young Vietnamese should be serving them. And it suddenly hit me like a brick. I've got a duty to come forward. They will ruin me, probably. They will set out to ruin me, but I have to do it, and I did it. And that's what John, I think, wants me to talk about. Taking the plunge and having the guts. And I got all that from all the innumerable people who grew me up. I didn't get it for myself. We don't always get it from ourselves instinctively. Some of your really massively brave people act incredibly instinctively, but we don't always learn it. Sometimes our unthinking response is our best. Our intuitive response is nearly always our best. Depends on the values we've been brought up with. But integrity is something you've either got it or you haven't got it. It's not a requirement you can tick off in your kit bag. It's not something, it's not an appendage. It's not a learned thing. You acquire it innately from all those wonderful people that you've known in your life, and you've acquired it yourself from facing up to challenges, be it health, be it drama, be it persecution and the rest. I've got a funny experience though about bravery. In my service days, I should say that I learned about Timor from a Z Force commando, because in the mid to late 60s, there were still trainers in the system who'd been in those commando and other elements. There was this fascinating man who trained me on two different courses, who told me about carrying pebbles in my pocket, and once when he was surrounded by the Japanese in the jungle, he made sure he wasn't under a tree, and he got separated, and it was dark, and he threw a pebble, and the Japanese cocked their weapons or moved, and he gradually worked out where they were, and he survived. So we were open-eyed young men hearing that during our training. Well, I didn't know where Timor was, but I read that book that Bernard Collaery wrote about the second independent company in Timor, and I remember what he said about the Timorese. So I was in 75, around those years I was serving in France, but occasionally, although I didn't work in the embassy, I was in the Cercle Militaire somewhere else. I had to go in on a Sunday afternoon and be on station in a cipher room of the embassy in case, immediate messages came in. I read the exchanges of Gough Whitlam. I read how we sold the Timorese out. I read it. I went home and I always said to my wife, I can't believe what I read this afternoon. We sold them out. But I'd been trained by a second Z Force man who told me what a great service the Timorese had given our soldiers trapped behind the lines in that guerrilla war. They were puzzling things for a young man, as I was, serving my country at that time. But you have to see through it. We have to give good leadership. And issues, when my office was raided and searched, I was very angry that a Special Forces file case I was doing was opened and read by whoever they were who raided my office. I felt completely abused by the reading of very important files that I had that had legal professional privilege. We had a time in our country, in the Howard Downer area, and I'm not speaking politically, I'm talking about values, when our country slipped. There was an absence of integrity at the top, at the core, a disgraceful era in Australian history. It's a time when we should not have behaved the way we did on a number of fronts. When I was at a mass grave in Timor in 1999-2000, I wanted John Howard to be next to me. John was two or 3 years ahead of me at law school, I knew him. And I wanted him there because on that Children Overboard affair, which was a fib, as we now know, he said mothers or fathers, mothers particularly, would throw an infant into the sea to get a visa. Children overboard. Well, we didn't pick up at the time. We all thought that was a lie because Peter Ruth and someone else, he was found out. But the reality was, when I saw that the mothers holding infants that had been executed by the militia, they'd all turned their backs. Their last thing they would do would be to sacrifice a child. So the Children Overboard affair was really a massive, massive insult to parenthood, motherhood particularly. I wish he'd been there at the graves when the investigators were turning the bodies over. You could see that the babies had gone, of course, quickly, no bones, but you could see that those mothers had all turned away from the fire. He should have been there. He should own up to that. He should own up to what happened in Delhi. There's been no owning up. I'm counselled, particularly by my own family and kids, not to be seeking vengeance, not to be seeking vindication either, because as a lawyer I know that's useless. But really, how do we come out of this terrible reputation we've got in our region now, unless there's a public demonstration by these men who perpetrated these problems by some form of recognition or apology? We should do it. We've held others to account at Nuremberg. Nuremberg just wasn't about the principal Nazi war criminals. There were 12 more trials over 3 more years of public servants, of lawyers, and particularly of German diplomats. And we've not done anything about what this whole Australian community knows was a vast breach of integrity in our name. So my invitation to speak about integrity required me to speak personally. So life's been fun. It's been hard to be honest at times. It's the last 4 years of being prosecuted as a criminal. Of course, I had to stand in my own dock. I'd spent my career working from and be indicted. And indicted for telling the truth, indicted for helping a decent, honourable man reveal crime and criminal misconduct. He and I were prosecuted for revealing criminal misconduct. And that's why Justice Anthony Wheely, Justice Stephen Charles in Victoria, and all those great judges have fought so hard for me in the last few years, and are fighting so hard now to get a national integrity body established in Canberra. And I do hope, John, that this cake we're going to cut with integrity across it will foreshadow a national integrity committee, so people like me, for giving legal advice, don't get thrown in jail. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a peace in our hearts and a hope in our hands. We're the family of children. We come from many different lands. Our time is just beginning. Our race is yet to run. But if you will take us with you, then we have already won. We're one under the southern skies, together in this land. Every voice in celebration, a family hand in hand under the southern skies. As one we rise and turn our eyes to see all the wonders of the future in a world of harmony. Harmony. There's a great spirit rising from the desert to the sea. As it sweeps across this southern land, it calls to you and me. We're the dreamers and the dreaming. We're the face of things yet to come. Every child can be a hero if our world can live as one. Under the southern skies, together in this land. Every voice in celebration, a family hand in hand under the southern skies. As one we rise and turn our eyes to see all the wonders of the future in a world of harmony. Under the southern skies, together in this land. Every voice in celebration, a family hand in hand under the southern skies. As one we rise and turn our eyes to see all the wonders of the future in a world